Good evening and welcome. Welcome to another edition of Attlas Live. Tonight, we are going to be exploring in some detail the nature of the soul. What exactly do we mean by soul? In this particular context, the multiple possible meanings of the word soul, and more importantly, what do we do to feed our soul, to grow it, to develop it? Much of so-called spirituality these days assumes far too much and makes very many false assumptions related to the nature of the spiritual work itself. So tonight, we hope to be able to delve into the facts and share some of the esoteric and metaphysical truths around this particular topic. The esoteric term that we will be using most often this evening is the monad. The monad comes from the Greek, and it denotes not just a vessel, but also a wanderer. And it's related very closely to the word nomad. It even sounds similar. The wandering vessel that wanders from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime on its journey of evolution, its journey of awakening, and its path to self-realization. On this journey, we will encounter many circumstances, many phenomena. And just what is the nature of those circumstances and phenomena? What is their actual nature? What is their metaphysical makeup? To that end, what is our metaphysical makeup? And how does our interaction with the universe and our world relate to the metaphysical constitution of both the phenomena we encounter and the elements which constitute our self, our monad, our being? And since all of reality, as it unfolds on every level, encompasses what we refer to as the transformation of energy, energy being transformed from one form to another. Tonight we wish to look and explore how that transformation of energies relates to the elements that we encounter and the elements which constitute our being. What is that relationship precisely? And what are the consequences of being unaware of that relationship? What happens if we do not consciously perform the requisite actions required to, quote, feed our soul? Having said all that, we will be taking as usual, a practical approach. And while we will be getting into some depth, we will also be making an attempt to streamline and simplify what we are discussing. So we may gloss over some areas or skip by some areas to really focus on this concept of feeding the soul and what that really means, practically speaking. Now, it is fair to say that likely all of us have heard the expression soul food. And for some, this literally means food that they eat, which they say feeds their soul. Comfort food, some people call it. Believe it or not, we will be getting into the topic of food, the topic of ingestion and digestion, and how specific foods relate to certain elements. And also debunking this notion that what is typically referred to as comfort food is not soul food. The two things are incompatible. If one considers for a moment which aspect of ourself desires comfort and security, then how could comfort food possibly be feeding the soul? When the desire for comfort and security comes from ego, specifically the ego of fear. It is fear which desires comfort and security. And comfort food conveniently offers fear some comfort, but in addition, comfort food conveniently feeds our gluttony. Because, as we all know, most comfort food is high in carbs, high in sugar, high in salt, high in whatever, high in fat, whatever the case may be, high in calories, generally speaking. Whether it's ice cream, whether it's potatoes, French fries. Here in Canada, they love their poutine, which is fries, cheese curds, slathered in boiling hot gravy. Some people like their fried chicken. Some people like their pizza. We're guilty of that, by the way. For us, we would have to say probably that pizza is one of those comfort foods for us. How could it not be? It's pure carbs and cheese. But then there's also foods that remind us of our mother and our childhood. For example, soup. We always had soup in the house. And so there's something comforting, the warmth of that, a warm bowl of soup. And specifically, we could best describe it, the best translation in English would be chicken noodle soup, like a consomme with angel noodles, angel hair noodles, or what the Vietnamese called pho. It's very common in Asia, that consomme type soup with thin noodles and whatnot. Warms you from the inside. It's also probably what you eat when you're sick. So there's that comforting, healing aspect of that. But does any of that feed the soul? This is what we're here to try to answer tonight. To kick things off, Roy asks, manna, is manna soul food? We're jumping ahead if we answer that question. But the answer is yes, of course. But what is exactly manna? Are you talking about bread, physical bread? No, certainly not. But what then is that manna, and what makes something manna and something else not manna? How do we define those two things? How do we tell the difference between the two things? Or is it possible to create manna out of almost anything? This is one of the secrets that we'll be exploring this evening. So, we have prepared some slides to help us go through some of these concepts. And the first thing that we really need to get straight is just what is this soul? What is the constitution of this thing that we call the monad? So here we have a tree of life, and we have the 10 sephira, and we're going to see if we can, going to see what the problem, why it's not advancing slides. All right. So here, the atmic body, or the Atman, the innermost being, this is the self. This is where the self is in reference to the, for example, the physical body and the vital body and the mental body. So let's quickly just go through these and then we can discuss it in some detail. So above it is the self's being, the logos, the cosmic Christ, the being of beings. The Buddhic body is what's known as the divine soul, or the consciousness. The consciousness is a faculty of Atman. It is a medium which serves the self. Connecting the two beneath is the causal body, also known as willpower. This is in the 6th dimension. All these three are all in the 6th dimension. And the causal body is known as the human soul, Tippereth, willpower. These three constitute what is known as the monad, the space that is created at the intersection between the self, the true self we mean, the being, the Buddhic body, and the causal body. This constitutes the monad, or the vessel, the nomad soul, which travels from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime on its journey. This is what constitutes our soul in any meaningful discussion. And what the monad as a vessel contains is, of course, our spirit. And the spirit, best described, is the Atman, the self, the innermost being, our spirit, our individuated essence of the Logos. Because this upper trinity is the multiplicity. This upper trinity constitutes the amalgamation and the brotherhood of all monads, of all beings, of all selves. So we are, in essence, this vessel, this vehicle. From here on in, then, when we consider what it means to feed the soul, we should visualize how it is that we are contributing to this vessel, how we are growing it, strengthening it, increasing its self-awareness in terms of increasing our free consciousness, but also its strength, its force in terms of willpower, the causal body. And that also, being the human soul, strengthens our connection to our true self. Because here, in the mental body and the emotional body, the vital body and the physical body, this is what constitutes the mortal being, the self that we all identify with. We are a character. We are a mortal vessel for our immortal vessel. And what connects us to our true self is the human soul. It is this causal body in the sixth dimension. But what exactly are we made of? When we talk about the elements, how do they emerge? From where? From what? And what do they mean? What are their... Because modern scientists look at ancient texts about the four elements and they laugh. But the four elements in esotericism do not refer to the four physical elements: fire, wind, air, water. Those elements have characteristics. Those elements are archetypal, meaning they exist at the first level of manifestation in the world of archetypes. We'll read the following from the Upanishads. From Atman did space come into being. From space, air. From air, fire. From fire, the waters. From the waters, the earth. From the earth, plants. From plants, food. And from food, man. Here, by food, what they mean is animals. So from the earth to plants to animals to man. So from the absolute, the ray of creation, the omnipresent ray of Akitanok, descends into the first world of Keter. And here we have the Hebrew letter Aleph, which represents air. Air is movement. And so the first movement, for example, vibration. So the first vibration. So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Well, to create sound, you need air. You must vibrate something. And what gets vibrated? Well, we'll get into that in a moment. It then descends into the second logos, which is fire. And from there, it descends to the third logos. Well, this is not working. Descends into water. And from there, it descends all the way down the remainder of the tree of life. So these are what are known as the mother letters in the Hebrew alphabet: Aleph, Shin, and Mem. And they represent the first three elements: air, fire, and water. The relationship between each of those elements as the ray of Okinanak descends down the tree of life, the qualities of those elements get reflected in each of the trinities which exist on the tree of life. Now, the tree of life is inside of us. So this can be reflected this way, so that we have in Aleph, in the head, air, which is related, of course, to mind, the mental movement of the mind. This should not be advancing by itself. This is quite annoying, actually, that this is advancing by itself. In any case, so we have Aleph and Shin in the heart, the emotional center, and Mem, water, in the sexual center, the sexual waters. And the fourth element, as is being illustrated here, is the body. The physical body represents the fourth element here, earth. Air is related to the mind because you observe your mind, and your mind is in constant motion. It is very mobile. It's like a wind that doesn't stop blowing. And that wind causes ripples, for example, on the sexual waters. You can observe this in yourself when your thoughts turn into sexual fantasies. And if you are thinking about sexual fantasy, you will become aroused. And that arousal is also related to the fire, because you can think yourself into an emotional state. Fire relates to temperature, hot or cold. And that's why Shin is associated with the emotional center, because it's in our heart that we feel burning anger, for instance, or ice cold indifference. We can feel burning passion, or we can feel cold blasé. And in the waters, in the sexual waters, sometimes the waters are still, sometimes they're ice cold. Sometimes we are absolutely not in the mood, sexually speaking. And it's like ice. Other times, it's like a storm. It's like a hurricane. And earth, being earth, the physical body, is fairly straightforward. But each of these elements have these qualities. From Atman did expansiveness come into being. From expansiveness, mobility. From mobility, temperature. From temperature, the fluidity. The fluidity, the solidity. Again, from the Upanishads. So what is this expansiveness? Well, that is the ether. That is the fifth element. So if we map out what this Upanishad is reflecting here, from the ether came mobility, which is the air. And then from the air came temperature, which is the fire. And from temperature, the fluidity, which is the water. And from the fluidity came solidity, the earth. The words beneath the elemental names are the tattvas. So the Akash, the Vayu, the Tejas, the Apas, the Prithvi. So you may come across that word tattvas. Tattvas, one-to-one, means the elements. But these are what constitute manifest reality on all levels, not just the physical plane. So how we can understand what the elements actually are if they're not physical, the physical elements are obviously related to these elements, but these are the metaphysical, archetypal essences of the elements. And all of them come from the space, the expansiveness, from the ether, and all represent the modification of. So all elements are really just vibrations or frequencies. To vibrate the ether in such a way as to make the ether or the akash manifest the qualities of the element associated with that particular vibration. So, for example, we know that matter as such doesn't exist. Everything is energy, but matter is energy being vibrated at a particular frequency in order that the quality known as solidity, the quality of materialness, of physicalness that we experience, appears. And we also know through our simple experimentation here on the physical plane that by increasing the vibration, we can change a solid to a liquid, for instance. We can change it from being, we can change the nature of its solidity to become more fluid. And there is a gradient between these things. It's not as simple as something's a solid, something's a liquid. There are many, many, many sort of in-between stages of solidity and fluidity. Things like, for example, jello. Things, for example, like magma or lava. There's plasma. There's all sorts of expressions of these different elements interacting with one another. Let's go a little bit further into their individual natures. So the ether, again, related to the Tattva Akash, has a mantra associated with it. And that mantra is Ha. We always found this interesting because Ha happens to be the universal mantra of laughter. In just about every culture, anywhere you go in the world, no matter what language they speak, isn't it interesting that ha, this is how we laugh. It's a universal mantra. And perhaps why it is that the expression laughter is the best medicine exists. The space, the expansiveness, the akash, the mother of all elements and the medium in which they all exist. There is even a school of laughter yoga you may be familiar with. That's an interesting practice. People get together and they just laugh. You can develop the capacity to spontaneously laugh. And it has tremendous benefits from a hormonal perspective, from a healing perspective, from a physical perspective, from a psychological, emotional perspective. And no doubt, much of that benefit derives from the fact that for half an hour or 45 minutes or an hour or 2 hours or for however long these groups will get together and simply laugh together, they are all essentially for 2 hours straight vocalizing the mantra Ha, the mantra of the ether, the mantra of the Akash, the Tattva. Each element is related to a planet, and in this case, the Akash is the ether is related to Saturn. Now, because this live stream is focused on feeding the soul, each element has an associated resource which we can work with to be able to extract the spirit, the spiritual atoms, the essence from of that element. And the material that we have to work with is known certainly in Gnosis as the AZF. This is, we could call it the Kundalini, the sexual force, the sexual fires. And the practice of Tantra is the practice of transforming and transmuting the sexual force in order to be able to extract the energies that the soul, the monad, can use to grow and develop. A stands for agua, water. Z, azufre, or sulfur. And F, fuego, fire. Alchemically, water plus fire equals consciousness. Also, A stands for azot, the chemical element related to fire, and A and Z are the alpha and omega, the beginning and end. This is what just relates to AZF. Oh, we have a few questions here, so let's see if we can get at a couple of these. Let's do this. You just touched on an interpretation I had, ether, the ethereal plane, being able to see our spirit moving, light coding, ways of communicating with higher consciousness. Hope to touch on that tonight. And Eric asks, are the Akashic records in the Akash? Yes, we're going to touch on both of those tonight. The short answer, Eric, is yes. Yes. In the astral plane. But everything, well, we're going to touch on that. We're going to get to these answers, but we're sort of trying to, it's difficult. It's difficult, of course, and we'll understand why when we get to that part. We're trying to parcel out and explain the individual elements before we start getting into the relationship between them all. This is one of those rare cases where, because normally we don't plan and we don't do slides and all this sort of thing, it's always difficult to broach these sorts of topics because all of this is, right? All the knowledge just is and has to be sort of comprehended holistically. It doesn't really work to portion it all out and break it all up and try this systematic logical approach through it. It doesn't really work. It's always a challenge because immediately we get questions like the ones that we just got. And of course, the questions are good questions. And we will get there. It's just that you guys are ahead. You guys are ahead of us here. And all right. So let's see if we can get to that point, and then we'll take those questions again. All right. So this was the ether, the Akash. Let's see if we can. Again, it doesn't want to. Okay. So the next one is air, related to the Tatwa Vayu, and it also has a mantra, and its mantra is Ya. Its planet is Mercury. Now, neither of these should really come as a surprise. Mercury, alchemically, is known as an element. The element Mercury is known as quicksilver, and Mercury is what moves around the sun fastest of all the planets. It's also closest to the sun. And Mercury, as you know or may know, was the messenger of the gods, Ratatoskr to the Nordics. And if you've read our poem Ratatoskr and the Seed, you understand and you comprehend what Mercury's job is. That's air, movement. And Mercury, even in our poem, is the go-between between the seed and the keepers of the knowledge, the brotherhood of the star, and all the aspects of the tree. It's Mercury that runs back and forth, relaying messages. He's the messenger. So yes, to the Norse, Mercury was Ratatoskr, and Ratatoskr is a squirrel. And we all are familiar with squirrels. We understand their nature. Quicksilver, the element of Mercury, it all starts to make sense. And Ya is, again, it's one of these sort of universal type expressions. It varies here and there, but generally speaking, many different languages use Ya or some version of that as the affirmative, the acknowledgement, the affirmative. The substance that is most strongly oriented toward the element of air is grape juice or wine. Because, of course, wine comes from grapes, grape juice. And in the ancient world, refrigeration was simply not a thing. So if you had grape juice for any length of time, invariably, it began to ferment, it began to become wine. So this is why wine is universally used in all world religions, because of all of the natural substances, foods in nature. The essence of grapes, the juice of the grape, is most related to this element of air. And again, this is Mercury, this is the messenger, this is the mind, and our connection, our closest connection to the Akash. That's why, so again, the Akashic records, you can understand why. And of course, there's also this aspect of wine as it relates to the Dionysian festival from Greece, and that is when they would get drunk, they would hallucinate, because in the ancient world, wine was a very, very potent narcotic and a very potent hallucinogen. It was not as it is today with all of these super strong spirits, etc. People in the ancient world hadn't developed the kind of tolerance for alcohol that we have today, where people can drink bottles and bottles of the stuff and just get silly, right? Just get stupid. Whereas in the ancient world, sipping wine, they could begin to see into higher dimensions, because of the activation of the air by virtue of the consumption of the grape juice. So, in terms of the element of air, feeding the soul. Grape juice is one of those substances that we can use to feed us that element. Fire relates to the Tattva Tejas. Its mantra is Ra. It's related to the planet Mars, which, if you've read any of the books of Master Samael, you can feel the fire in his writing. He is the regent of Mars and the god of war. Again, fire, that temperature, that passion, that intensity that goes along with that. Depending on your lifestyle choices, you may or may not find it comforting to know that the best source of the element of fire in terms of a dietary source is red meat. And because of this, it's one of the reasons why we should try to limit the amount of red meat we consume. Because eating too much red meat, if we observe ourselves, if we're on a diet of a lot of red meat, you will be able to observe yourself, your temper, your mercurialness, how quickly you lose you get angry, etc., etc. If you suffer from things like anger management, one of the ways that you can help curtail your anger and get it under control is to eat a lot less red meat. Cut back dramatically on your red meat. If you are practicing scientific chastity and you find yourself suffering from a lot of nocturnal pollutions or wet dreams, it may be because you have too much fire in your system. So you may find that if you cut back on the red meat, then you will be less of a target for astral larvae to come and fornicate while you sleep, because this will add to the fire. Now, some people say spicy foods also add to the fire for obvious reasons. So if you have red meat and you spice it up with a lot of cayenne pepper or chilies or whatever it is, you may be asking for some trouble one way or another. Next, we have water related to the Tattva Apas. Its mantra is Va, or Wa, Va. Does wild game have more fire? If it's red meat, that's a good question. It really, if the darker and more red it is, the more fire it has. So the short answer is probably yes. Is meat somewhat grounding? No, it's not grounding in any way, shape, or form. It's fire. We're going to get to grounding in a second, but no, meat won't help ground you. So getting back to water here for a moment, the planet and moon, Venus and the moon, are both related to water. And the source of water in our life, besides physical water, that's sort of obvious, but in terms of nutrition, it's fish. Fish clearly have that quality of fluidity. And we can say quite with a fair bit of confidence that fish means fish. So the creepy crawlies at the bottom, the shrimp and the scallops and the mussels and all of the things that are in the Bible that are not kosher, that are said these are the things that you shouldn't eat from the sea. the reason why they're saying that from a purely esoteric perspective is that those do not possess the element of water, despite the fact that they're in the ocean or underwater. We imagine things like squid and calamari and stuff are still okay. We're not sure if they're kosher or not, but they're definitely more in the category of fish than, let's say, mussels or, yes, and it's that quality of fluidity related to that, to water. And finally, we have earth, related to the Tattva Prithvi, which is always a challenge to pronounce properly. We have La, the mantra La, related to the sun. Interesting as that may be. And that's the kinship between the sun and the earth. And there is, in the center of this earth, a kind of sun, that molten center. Now, here is where we get into the grounding. Grains. Grains are where we get our earth element from. And grains, coming back to Eleftira's earlier question, she asked, is meat somewhat grounding? If the meat is fed grains, its fire will have transformed the earth in those grains into fire. So that said, the atoms, the molecules, the energy of those grains will affect the meat. So in a very simplistic sort of way, we can say that in that sense, meat is somewhat grounding, but very, 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 very minimal. Very, very minimal. We would not say, well, eat grain-fed veal and you'll get all, and you're going to be, you're going to get all your earth elements. It's still going to be fire. And ironically, if you eat grass-fed meat, then they extract the fire from grass, from plants. But so the grain, so here you have everything. In the West, we think of grains mostly as wheat, rye, barley, etc. In the East, obviously, their choice of grain is rice. In Central America, certainly, their choice of grain was corn. So, but grains cover a vast family of grains that obviously grow from the earth and embody the element, that grounding element, the solidity, the stability, solidity and stability. So But of course, since we're talking about the progression, from Atman did space come into being, from space air, from air fire, from fire the waters, from the waters the earth, from the earth plants, from plants food, meaning animals, and from animals man. Excuse me. So here, from the Akash down through the four other elements, then we enter into the mineral kingdom. And from the mineral kingdom progresses to the plant kingdom. And from the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the animal kingdom, the humanoid kingdom. So our monad is inserted into the mineral kingdom at the beginning of our journey. And we have the upward cycle of evolution of the monad through each of these four kingdoms. That vehicle, that vessel, that divine soul, that nomad travels lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, evolving and growing and learning, developing, its consciousness growing, its experience growing, first through the mineral kingdom, then as various different lifetimes, as various different plants, and then various different animals, until finally it attains a lifetime in the human kingdom. It's born a human. Oops. If we only ever get as high as the fifth dimension, meaning the astral plane, if we remain in our mind, and we do not, if we only remain in our mind in those four lower elements and in the four lower kingdoms, then we will fall into devolution. The conscious evolution into the higher worlds, the higher kingdoms, begins at the sixth dimension. And to achieve that, to attain that, to awaken the consciousness, we must work with all four elements, but most importantly, the fifth element, which is the ether, the Akash. Because the ether is the mother of all four elements. And it is the ether that we long to extract from each of the four other elements. Because all four elements are simply the ether in vibration. And we said that the ether in us is the sexual force. The sexual force is that omnipresent ray of Akidanak, the ray of creation, which descends and creates, that descends into the space and vibrates and creates these different elements, expresses these archetypal qualities: mobility, temperature, fluidity, solidity. But it's this space, the expansiveness, that allows for the expression, the manifestation of those different qualities in all the different levels of our being. What's the next slide now? Okay, so we're going to go back. So we're going to leave this slide up for a while, because here's where we're going to take, now that we've had a chance to go over this and see the relationship between the elements. Yes, each element descends one after another as the ether becomes more dense. First it's air, then fire, then water, then earth. But the spirit, the essence, is in all of those elements. It is simply the space that is being moved at different frequencies to create those qualities. Okay. We have some questions here. With sixth, we do not incarnate to this physical earthly realm. Now, if you awaken in the sixth dimension, you are awakened, enlightened, you're a Buddha, and you've created the solar causal body, the solar astral body, the solar Buddhic body, and the solar atmic body. You can enter into nirvana and become what's known as a nirvani or pratyeka Buddha. Then you can reincarnate to this realm. But you've essentially earned a ticket into heaven. You don't have to return mechanically as everyone who's trapped on the wheel of samsara, as all those who have yet to create their solar bodies. So yes, so the word here is reincarnate. You can reincarnate from nirvana, but you can't get to nirvana without a solar causal body, right? You can, unless you awaken in the sixth dimension, you cannot exist in nirvana. You can only exist in the lunar astral plane, asleep, dreaming, in hell, basically. We've covered that in a previous live stream. Eric asks, does fish cool the fire? Again, you must have some pretty good intuition, because you're ahead of me. You're ahead of me. Well, why don't we get into that then? Why don't we just jump right into the next slide? We can come back to this. This picture here shows an initiate being attacked or attacking, depending on how you look at it. This initiate here with the club is facing off against 4 clones of himself. Let's make this bigger so you guys can see it. 4 copies of himself. This is all one person. This is not a gang beating up on some poor fellow. This is all one person. And as you can see, of the 4 over here, 1 is attacking him with fire. 1 is attacking him with what looks like air, a wind, a cloud or smoke of some kind. 1 is spraying him with water. And 1 is holding a rock. Is hitting him with a rock. This picture refers to what in esotericism we call the Four Ordeals. Each ordeal relates to one of the four elements: air, fire, water, and earth. You see, as we said at the beginning, these elements are at all levels of reality, all levels of creation. There is nothing in manifest reality that is not constituted by these four elements, which means you and I are also made up of these four elements. But when we observe ourselves, we know that these elements are running rampant inside of us. We know that our mind is blown like the wind. It's like this tsunami that never stops blowing. It's just thoughts just keep coming and coming and coming and coming and coming. We know that our temperature, our fire, is to a large degree beyond our control. We're angry, we're sad, we're hot, we're cold. Goes up and down. Our emotional stability, or rather instability, where we experience a kind of mercurialness, or we're always cold, or we're always hot, and it's beyond our control. It's very mechanical and reactive. We react to things, and these elements go crazy inside of us. Same with the water, our sexual arousal, our sexual urges, or when we are trying to arouse someone or ourselves be aroused and nothing. And the sexual center, the sexual waters are ice, frozen over, and we can't seem to get them to respond to anything. And then finally, the earth, the solidity, there's that sluggishness, there's that stuckness. We can feel stuck, we can feel immobile, we can feel frozen. So, where's the fifth element? The fifth element is here. It is that space, and it is that substantive expansiveness that in this particular expression is willpower, the will, and working with the Akash, working with the ether, the sexual fire, the sexual force, is very much an exercise in the development and cultivation of willpower, in the actual creation and development of willpower. And it is with willpower that you see this image, the initiate battling himself, fighting the other elements as they are being used against him. It is the fifth element, which constitutes them all, that can be used to bring them under our control. It is the ether, it is the Akash, the fifth element within us. If we use it and work with it, that we can become masters of the other four elements. Now, some of you may have noticed in the background, we usually try to pick a visually interesting and appropriate background for our live streams, and tonight is no exception. We have various different creatures representing the different elements. We have wind, and we have fire, we have water, and we have earth. But over here over here, whoops, behind our microphone here, you can just barely see a serpent. It's the fifth element, the sexual force, the kundalini. But what you don't see, because it's being hidden by ourselves, is, we can just move out of the way long enough, is the magician, the initiate. The one who, and if we lean this way, you can see he's got a staff representing the spinal column, and it's an illuminated staff. You see, this magician has mastered the four elements. And he has mastered those four elements by virtue of that serpent that is subtly in the background there. That is the Akash. Because in us, the Akash, that space, is in the background. How many of us think of the fifth element when we think of the elements? And how many of us work with that? And how many of us, when we work with our human machine and our mental body and our emotional body and our physical body and our sexual force, do we remember the space? Taoism is all about cultivating this space inside of us. Meditation is about going into that space and knowing that space directly. But how does one master the elements? And what does that entail specifically? We return to this image and a discussion of the four ordeals. And when we consider what these ordeals are, the ordeals are tests, trials. Each one relates to one of the elements, and they take place for the most part in the astral plane, but they can also take here in the physical. They can also take place here in the physical plane, or we can be undergoing them in the astral plane and simultaneously in the physical plane, as above, so below. And these ordeals will have some characteristic related to the element that we are that is related to that ordeal. So for this portion, rather than okay, we want to read for you. This is from and we're going to link these lectures for you in a minute. But for this portion, we want to read for you the following. Okay, the Ordeal of Error. So ordeals of error are situations given to us by our innermost. Remember, every ego is a consequence of and a stimulator of karmic consequences, of karmic circumstances. When we have attachments to things, when we depend on material things for our security, when we are attached to money or to people or things or environments or places or status we have, egos created in relation with that circumstance. So in order to see that ego, that circumstance needs to be shaken by a wind, by the air, so that we will see it in ourselves. So in relation to air, initiates face ordeals related with the loss of what they love. You might find out that your company is going to be closed, and you are going to lose your job. And if you are going to lose your job, you can lose your house and everything else. That would be an ordeal of error. You can especially see this is an ordeal because you heard a rumor and your whole reaction is all in your head. It may not even be actually happening, but you hear the rumor and you begin to think about it and your mind gets upset. The mind races. The mind is very airy, and that ordeal becomes quite intense. All of this in relation with the mind. You can see this in dreams when you have dreams or visions of falling, or you are on the edge of a cliff, or you are in a very high place and you feel like you might fall and you become afraid. You do not want to lose where you are or what you have. These types of dreams relate to this type of ordeal. How do you conquer an ordeal of air? With willpower, with remembrance of God, with the fifth element. We will get more into that in a minute. We just wanted to go over some of these because we have our own experiences of some of these ordeals. However, our experiences are not as extensive and our experiences are somewhat different. So we wanted to share this with you, and you can, by all means, you can go and read this on your own time as well. Reread it. We do encourage you to reread it, because sometimes just speaking from our experience might be very limiting. It might be too narrow a view. There will be many, many, many different ways that we might experience ordeals of air and ordeals of fire and ordeals of water. These are just some examples, some other examples that we felt that we wanted to broaden the discussion here around what we were sharing. So here's ordeals of fire. In ordeals of fire, we will be attacked with fire, persecuted, we will be wronged, criticized, blocked or obstructed, betrayed, in order to rouse our anger, our passion, our emotion, our resentment. This ordeal tests our temperature, our sweetness and security. We all have our own flavor of fire in our psyche, different types of egos that are fiery. In dreams, we can see big fires, flames, or the threat of being burnt, and all different forms. Also, criticism can come in the form of arrows and bullets in dreams. So if someone is shooting at you, that is criticism. Also, someone stealing your wallet or ID, they are doing that to steal your image, to gossip about you, to criticize you, to spread negativity about you. That can also be an ordeal of fire. Remember, these ordeals can also happen physically. Does fish cool the fire? So in that sense, yes. And we'll get into that again. We're gonna come back to that in a minute. Let's get through the ordeals, and then we want to get to the section on how to deal with them, how to go with them. Lefteria says, I thought it was earth, water, air, fire, spirit, at least in the pentagram. Is spirit synonymous with the transmutation of sexual energy? As we stated at the beginning, spirit is the Atman, the being. And ether is absolutely related to spirit in that sense, but it has to be transmuted, it has to be transformed. So ether is spirit vibrating in a different way, or rather, spirit is the ether vibrating in a different way. The two things are practically interchangeable, but we specifically speak of the Akash and the space because just that's the way. I mean, if you want to think about it in spirit, you can, But your spirit, your innermost being, is consciousness, is a being, is an entity. It's not an I, it's your innermost being, your divine mother, and the 12 individuated aspects of the being. So again, we don't want to get too crazy here into the metaphysical esoteric stuff, because the mind doesn't really need to know that. It really doesn't. Not at our level. You get to worry about that and need to know that when you get there. But for right now, ether is the space in which the other four qualities, four elements, come into vibration and exist. But it's all just ether. It's all just the body of the Divine Mother. And so in that sense, it is the spirit, because the Divine Mother is an aspect of our innermost being, is an aspect of spirit. If that makes any sense. One of the things to remember is that a lot, again, this knowledge just is, it just exists. And when we start trying to parcel it out and parse it out and label it, and then try to use our intellect to understand it, and then we say, well, no, but I want it to be this way, I learned it this way, and the conditioned mind starts placing the labels. We get into difficulty, because reality is not exactly quite like that. It's much more holistic, and it's much more comprehensive, and everything is connected to everything else. So when we talk about our Divine Mother, when we talk about the Akash, when we talk about the Kundalini, we're actually talking about the Christ, the ray of creation, which descended from the Absolute. But in its process of descending, it is changing its nature, its constitution, and it's expressing itself through, again, mobility, temperature, fluidity, solidity, and it's this space that is being changed. It is the body of the Divine Mother. The entire universe, all of manifest reality, is feminine in that sense. It is all the Akash in that sense. The Akash is the mother of all the supernal worlds and the infernal worlds. Well, and again, some of this esoteric stuff is not really our specialty. Like when we start getting into some of the explanations of this stuff, it's this is all new to us in the sense of speaking about it, and speaking about it in a way which, again, the challenge for us is to attempt to put it into a way for the mind to understand and absorb it. Because frankly, we would much prefer to make a film about it or write a poem about it or something. But unfortunately, that just doesn't work anymore, because people's minds are not attuned that way anymore. Their consciousness is not attuned to the symbolic and allegorical way of interfacing with knowledge. So everybody is so in their heads that they want some kind of rational step-by-step ABC top 10 list, right? Give me a bulleted list. Give me a one-page overview. Okay, so where were we in our ordeals? We were at Yes, we were at water. The ordeal of water is where our circumstances change radically, and this tests our fluidity and adaptability. It also tests our altruism and philanthropy. The reason is that generally we consider our circumstances only in regards to our well-being, not others. The inclination of the water element is to give life. So when we have an ordeal with water, it is usually in relation with our happiness for others, or our generosity or lack thereof. With this ordeal, we can have dreams of drowning, raging waves or seas, floods. We can be trapped on the ocean or trapped out on a great water. You can also have dreams of rain. Rain specifically symbolizes karma. Rain specifically symbolizes karma is coming, something difficult and painful. If you dream of a big rainstorm and you are getting soaked, you are going to suffer some kind of karmic scenario that will be painful. Yet, if you dream of having an umbrella, that can be your being or your psychological work or some protection. So if you dream that you have an umbrella and the rain is around you and you are not getting wet, that means you have protection. That's a good dream. That means you're prepared for the coming ordeal of water. If you have a dream where you're in the rain, but you have an umbrella to shield you from the rain. Finally, we have the Ordeal of Earth. Ordeals of Earth. We're going to try this for a second. Ordeals of Earth. Let's see. No, we can't. Ordeals of Earth are where we are obstructed, have no way to proceed with our goals. We are restrained or weighed down. If you have had a dream where you cannot walk, you are trying to run, but you are slow, you cannot get any speed, then you are weighed down, either by being asleep or by attachments or by psychological habits, ways of seeing things that make you stuck. You cannot move the way you need to. That is an ordeal of Earth. Remember, a few weeks ago, we did a live stream talking about patience and waiting in the dark. Well, listen to this. Ordeals of Earth test our solidity, perseverance, and ability to deal with inconveniences. Ordeals of Earth can also be like where we feel we are being crushed. So if we see in a dream that we are being crushed between giant rocks, or we are being buried alive, or somehow we are doing something in relation with a mountain or a cliff, these can be related with the ordeals of Earth. If you have a dream of an earthquake and everything is changing, it is related with all your circumstances. Everything is going to change. This is an ordeal related to change. All of these ordeals, in one form or another, incorporate one of the other elements. Perhaps you've noticed that as we were speaking about these ordeals. So, for example, in the ordeal of air, we're talking about, loss and change. Well, but that's air, that's movement, right? Something needs to move, something needs to change, but that's also fluidity, right? Now we were just talking about the ordeal of Earth, talking about you're stuck, right? So you need to move, you need to change. So one of the things about Earth, when you think about Earth, what erodes Earth? Two things that we can think of erodes Earth: air and water. So this brings us back to what Eric asked earlier. Does fish cool the fire? In any of the ordeals, in any time that we are suffering from any one of the elements, we can use willpower, our akash, the fire of Kundalini that we have, which is not the fire of the element fire. It is the fires in the waters and the sulfurs. In other words, it's the superior fire in the space of the akash that we can bring our willpower to bear, and we can bring the opposite element into focus. So if we are stuck and we are suffering this ordeal of Earth, we need air, mobility, and we need water, fluidity. Either one or both of those to get us unstuck. If we're having a dream of an earthquake, or there's some sort of earth-shattering change in our life, well, that's an ordeal of air. Well, then how do you adapt? With fluidity, right? It's water that can survive any earthquake because you just go with the flow. But if we're Wile E. Coyote and we're about to be crushed by a giant boulder, then what do we need to do? We need to get out of the way. We need to move. We need air. So, and of course, again, if we are experiencing a ordeal of fire, then obviously, how do you deal with fire? Right? What element do you bring to bear if you're suffering from fire? If you're burning, what is it that soothes and cools and counteracts the effects of fire? What else if not water? So if you are suffering from an ordeal of fire, or going through, or suffering from, right now you're dealing with a lot of personal attacks or gossip or criticism, or your anger is being triggered and you're finding it difficult to control, well, again, what we said earlier, you cut down on your red meat, and instead, exactly, Eric, you eat fish, because fish is the element of water. So if you're suffering from anger management issues and you got to get your anger under control, now this is not a permanent solution to keep eating fish and stop eating red meat, but it will allow you to cool the fire enough so that you can get a better handle on it, and so that you don't do anything stupid, so that you don't create harm for yourself and for others, that you don't start creating more karma because this fire is raging out of control. You've got to get the fire under control. And once you have the fire under control, now you are in a position where you can start working on the long-term solution. There's no such thing as dousing the fire entirely. You can't permanently douse the fire because you need the fire. This is not about eliminating any of these elements from your person, from your psyche, from your physical body, from your astral body, your mental body. No, you need the elements. We are the elements. It is entirely about mastering these elements, controlling these elements. That is what a magi, a priest, a priestess, a magician really is: a master of the elements, a master of nature. But whereas what sets a white magician apart from a black magician is that a black magician doesn't worry about mastering the elements inside of themselves. Their only concern is about controlling the world and controlling others, controlling the elements out in the world. And they do that precisely by exploiting and expending their precious sexual energy, their akash. They use their akash and exploit it. They spend it. Whereas a white magician adds to it. It extracts. Uses, for example, the difference between white tantra and black tantra. Black tantra leaves you spent, leaves you wasted. It expends the energy in Black Tantra. To create, to empower, whereas in White Tantra, you create the energy, you preserve it, you transmute it, you feel you feel more full, more. You literally are creating love. You literally are making love. You are transforming and transmuting the sexual fires and the sexual waters into love and into the solar bodies. Those superior vehicles related to the monad, the human soul, the solar bodies of the causal body, the atmic body, and the Buddhic body. And of course, the astral body and the mental body, which you need first, solar, astral, solar, mental. These are the vehicles that we need to be able to travel in the supernal worlds. So a white magician masters the elements within themselves first. And once they achieve the level of master, then they can look to performing miracles and helping others and transforming and working with the elementals of nature, which is another level of this discussion, which we're not going to get into, but you can read about it in the articles that we're going to post as we continue. Okay. All right, then. So coming back to this question then, related to feeding our soul. If really the element that is most precious to us is the ether, and the ether is the mother of all other elements, and the ether is at the heart of all other elements, and the ether itself is an aspect of spirit, and spirit itself is an aspect of Christ, an individuated essence of Christ, the ray of creation, then that means that those spiritual atoms exist in all elements. That ray of creation descends into all of creation as it vibrates in different ways, as it expresses itself, and as those different archetypal expressions express themselves. For example, in the mineral, the plant, the animal, and the human kingdom. And the physical level, we have mobility, temperature, fluidity, and solidity. We have that expressed on the physical plane. Just as it's in the etheric plane, just as it's in the astral plane, the mental plane, the causal plane, the Buddhic plane, the atmic plane. And so the third dimension, fourth dimension, fifth dimension, sixth dimension, and zero dimension, or seventh dimension, the world of archetypes, Absolute. So moment by moment, as we go through life, we talked a little bit about eating certain foods, drinking grape juice, eating red meat, eating fish, eating grains. And we talked about the extraction of those elements from those foods. But if what we want to do is feed our soul, and we know going right back to the beginning of the live stream, that our soul consists of our being and our consciousness and our human soul, our willpower, do you think you can feed your soul if you scarf down a burger while mindlessly surfing the internet? Even though you can have a nice big quarter pounder with cheese, lots of beef in there, lots of red meat, and of course, if you have it on any sort of reasonably good artisanal bun, then you have grains. And then you have a bottle of grape juice with it, but you just scarf it down. Are you going to be feeding your soul? We talked about those foods having those elements in it. And we just said that the slide on the screen says that the ether is in everything. So ether's got to be like, you've got to be getting the element of air from that grape juice, right? You can just drink a whole bottle of it. What about that quarter pounder of beef? What about that big bun? Are you feeding your soul? We're going to wait until somebody hazards a guess in the chat. All right, we'll ask an easier question first. Are you feeding your body? Yes or no? If you scarf down a burger and a drink and some fries, and let's assume you went to a nicer place, that everything was made by hand and nothing came out of a freezer. Nothing came out of a bag or a bucket. Aha, okay. We have a taker. Eric says, no, you're not feeding your soul because it's not conscious. Correct. You're not feeding your soul precisely because you're just doing it mechanically, and you're just feeding your body at that point. Those elements are going into your body, and your body is going to digest them, and your body digests them and transforms them mechanically. Right? We don't make that happen. You and I don't make that happen. We eat, and we know that so many hours later, the digestive system will do its thing on its own. And not only that, we have untold billions and billions and billions of microbes that are assisting in that process. The probiotics, right? And all of that happens mechanically. We don't. So what gets extracted is going to feed primarily our physical body. However, there is a catch or a twist to this. And that is the elements in that food is going to be feeding spirit. It is going to be feeding monads. It is going to be feeding souls. Just not our monad, not our soul. It's going to be feeding the souls of all of the atoms and all of the cells and all of the bacteria and all the microbes and the organs of our physical body. Did you ever stop to consider and think about how many monads make up your physical body? Every atom has a soul. every cell, every bacteria, every organ, because everything in nature has at its very heart and its very heart and soul an essence, an atom nous, the we atom. And around that is contained what we defined earlier as the monad, the nomad vessel, the monad. Because everything is conscious. Everything has consciousness. Now, that cell in the small intestine doing that work, that activity of digestion, that transformation of the physical elements into energy, into minerals, into vitamins, into that which is absorbed into the body, and the bacteria that are breaking down fiber, right? The complex carbon chains in fiber to extract energy and to allow us to be able to digest those otherwise insoluble fibers. They have consciousness. And they're performing their duties according to their level of consciousness, which is mechanically, but that is their level of consciousness. That's consciousness at the mechanical level. So mechanical nature is conscious, and it's performing its duty mechanically because that's the level of consciousness that it has. So to put it another way, you cannot compare the consciousness of a bacteria to that of a human being. Just as you can't compare the body of a cell, of a single-celled organism, you can't compare the body of a single-celled organism to the body of a human being and the complexity and the psychology and everything else that we possess in terms of the increased consciousness, because there's a large spectrum between the mineral, the plant, the animal, and the human kingdom that is separated. That atom, let's say, the consciousness is in an atom versus the consciousness in a human being. But then on a completely different scale, you can't compare the body or the life or the consciousness of a human being with that of a planet or that of a star, the sun. Because the difference in scale and scope is too enormous. And the activity is too different. The level of consciousness is too profoundly different to be able to start putting those things and weighing those things. But it's all the same. It's just a question of scale and scope. So we largely are ignorant of all the other monads that make up our body. And we are, for lack of a better expression, like a god to them. That's why a human being is a microcosmos. Because all of those elementals, by the way, is the word that we use for souls of nature. Monads. The elementals are the elemental souls of nature. They are the monads who are at those lower levels in the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, etc. They are the elements of the Akash expressing themselves in that purest, simplest, most subtle, most smallest, least developed, a monad in its infancy. So if you ever want to comprehend the Christ, begin by comprehending that your body is a multiplicity of souls, of monads, of individuated essences, individuated nomads going from lifetime to lifetime, but they are working in service of you. Their existence, their entire existence, how for that short period of time that they exist, lifetime to lifetime, at least in this particular moment, and probably for the next lifetime, number of lifetimes, is going to be in the service of you, in your service. You can extend this out, of course, to the next level, to the things that you eat. Because everything that you eat was once alive, and is still alive from an esoteric perspective. Because just because that the animal died doesn't mean that the cells in the meat that you're eating are dead. Just because the plant may have died, or people say, vegetarians say, well, you don't have to kill plants to eat their fruit. Well, fair enough. But that fruit is alive and it's separate. And that fruit is made up of cells of umpteen trillions of monads that are all alive, that all have elemental souls, and that they are all going to die when you eat that fruit. That's just how it is. That's how the system works. And those elementals, in the performance of their duty at their level of consciousness, feed their soul through their sacrifice. It is when we perform our duty to our soul that we feed our soul. What's true for the elementals of nature is true for us. The difference is we have free will, whereas they, at their level of consciousness, are mechanical, and they're controlled by the mechanical laws of nature. But we have free will. We can choose not to perform our duty to our being, our innermost, our monad. We can go through life asleep. We can go through life mechanically, controlled by the mechanical forces of nature. We can go through life scarfing down our burger and drinking our grape juice, surfing the web. And in that moment, there's no difference, practically speaking, between us and a bacteria in our digestive system. Because in that moment, if we are unconsciously eating, if we are asleep and mechanically scarfing down that food and drinking that drink, there's no difference between us and a bacteria. They're just going through the motions. They're just doing what comes naturally to the physical body, and we're just feeding our body. And what may be appropriate to the bacteria is appropriate to the bacteria at its level of consciousness, which is mechanical nature. But it's a bacteria. Do you honestly want to go through life with all of the faculties that you have and all the potential inside, and go through life consuming and multiplying as bacteria do? Or would you rather feed your soul and grow and develop and reach the next level of your evolution and get off this wheel of evolution and devolution and get into the sixth dimension and into the supernal worlds? Because that is a process of transformation, of transforming the elements which inside of us are mechanical, influenced by the egos which we created, and we want to make them conscious. We want to raise them up. We want to transform ourselves, transform our nature, master our nature. That is what a humanity is for, to be masters of nature. But this, you see, was very easily twisted and corrupted into what we see today. This humanity meddling with nature and creating abominations of nature, meddling with genetics, meddling with nuclear fission, meddling with radiation, meddling with all sorts of stuff, and genetically engineered foods and fish farms and all sorts of meddling, introducing species from here and there and everywhere to where they don't belong. The chemical warfare that this humanity has subjected nature to. Eric asks, does feeding the soul feed the consciousness of the earth? No. No. But what it does is it improves the karma of the earth. See, our consciousness is our consciousness. Just like that bacteria, see, we can eat the food mechanically, right? That has no impact on the bacteria, on how the bacteria does its job. And if the bacteria is doing its job properly, in accordance with the law, at its level of consciousness, at its level of being, that's going to have no effect on our consciousness, right? You see, your liver or your heart, your lungs, they perform their duty. And everybody on this planet has hearts and lungs and kidneys and all sorts of mechanical aspects of their body that all have monads, that are all performing their duty according to their level of being, their level of consciousness. And yet, none of that has any impact whatsoever on people waking up, people becoming more conscious. Nothing and no one can make you more conscious. Nothing and no one can make you more conscious. Period. The assistance that we need to become more conscious comes from our being and our divine mother. That is the assistance that we need to call upon. Ourself. We must work in cooperation with our Divine Mother and our innermost being to become more conscious. Why? Because it is our being that becomes more conscious, not us. This personality, this physical body, came from mechanical nature and is going back to mechanical nature. We believe we've been very clear on that over and over and over again. But by doing our duty, and what that duty is, we're getting into right now, and that is the transformation, the conscious transformation of impressions, beginning with mindful eating. Because if you eat mindfully, paying attention to what you are doing, paying attention to the food that you're eating, remembering the elementals that are giving their life for you in that meal, whether you're eating meat or not. This is unfortunately, this is a argument that the vegans and the vegetarians do not want to hear and do not want to accept. They want to believe that by eating plants, they're eating inert, lifeless, soulless substances. It's just not the case. There is nothing in the universe that isn't that doesn't have life. There's nothing in the universe that is lifeless, that is soulless. How could there be? How could there be? When the Akash is the foundation of everything, the Akash is the body of the Divine Mother. And everything is a monad. Everything has at its heart a vessel, an individuated essence of God. Because everything is God. But it's individuated. And it's given free will. And it all has different levels of being. It's all experiencing life in all of these different levels in all different ways. And it's all seeking consciousness. It's all seeking to return. To return with multiple, countless lifetimes of experiential knowledge. So, to feed your soul, to extract the nutrition, that experiential knowledge, we must pay attention. We must observe. We must be present. We must be mindful. That is how we extract from the elements, the spirit contained in them, the metaphysical nourishment. And when we are making love to our spouse and we are transmuting the sexual force and we are working with the fires and waters and we are praying and we are remembering our Divine Mother and we are, through the love and the connection and the bond that we have with our spouse, that loving union, and remembering our true self and our true selves and the soul connection that we have, the bond between our innermost and the innermost of our lover, of our spouse, of our monad and their monad. And we allow our physical union to be the lock and the key for the union between two monads. Now we are turning that we scarcely want to call it sexual intercourse because it sounds so cold and mechanical and clinical. No, we take that beautiful ritual of pure love and we turn it into a crucible of magic and a ritual of white magic that creates, and what it creates is the most powerful nutrition that we can give to our soul, our monad, the solar bodies, the substance that with which our Divine Mother will craft the solar bodies for us. And moment to moment to moment to moment, and moment to moment to moment to moment, we must do the same thing when we engage with the world around us. When we receive what are known as impressions. So anything that we take in through our five senses, what we see, what we hear, what we listen to, what we watch, particularly when we face circumstances which on some level feel like one of those ordeals, an ordeal of air, an ordeal of fire, an ordeal of water, an ordeal of earth. So the fire, for example, someone starts insulting us, someone's attacking us. Now, clearly, we are going to be tempted, and automatically the mechanical aspects of us, including the element within us, is just naturally going to be ignited. The fire is going to be ignited. Just because people are going on the offensive, someone's throwing fire at us, we're going to feel the fire inside us as we get burned. And that's going to make us want to fight fire with fire. And while it is true that in that moment, we can try to use flexibility, like water, right? We can choose water to combat the fire, to douse the fire inside of us. Yes, we can do that. But we can also use ether, willpower. And that's why so often people tell us to use the breath. Why would the breath relate to ether? Well, the breath relates to pranayama, and pranayama relates to working with the sexual force, which is the ether, which is inside of us. So by working with the breath, we're not working with air, we're actually working with prana, we're working with our ether by doing pranayama, for example. So we can use pranayama to help dissipate or fight the fire, like our fellow here in the photograph is using his willpower, is using his ether, his akash, to fight the elements. And we can use that with any of the elements inside of us, especially when they're being used by ego. So when you feel gluttony or laziness, for example, laziness, and you don't want to move, you don't want to get up out of bed, you just, oh God, don't, So what do? What's going to get you out of bed? I mean, really, it's only one thing, right? It's your willpower. It's going to get you out of that bed and get you, or I don't want to exercise, or I don't want to do this, or I don't want to do anything, and you're stuck. You're in that earth, and that earth is weighing you down, and it's weighing you down through these egos that are working, and they're using that element against you. So you break out of that using your willpower, certainly. But there's another way to approach all of this, because working with the individual elements against one another is fine. But what if we could transform the element before it even hits us? What if we could transform the impression? Just before we get there, Eric asks, I meant more as in the earth itself, not the people. Yes, we know exactly what you meant, and our answer is still the same. We know that's what you meant. We weren't referring to other people and other consciousness, but the monad of the earth is still a monad. It is still a being. It's another being. And as we said, the activity of your cells in your body seem to have no bearing whatsoever on your level of consciousness. They do what they do, and you can remain just as unconscious as you ever were, no matter how well they do their work. You're not going to become conscious or more conscious because of what they do. What they do is affecting their monads, their karma. Collectively, your karma is collectively integrated, and they share in your karma and you in theirs, but they far more in yours than the reverse. But in terms of consciousness, just as the cells in your body can't make you more conscious, we human beings can't make the planet more conscious. We can make ourselves more conscious as individuals. That's why there is no such thing as a global awakening. Does not exist. That is an entirely complete and total utter fabrication of the New Age. It does not and cannot exist, because that is not the way the universe has been organized. Not least because if someone or something could awaken another being, that would completely and totally and utterly violate the law of free will. Every single monad has the free will on whatever level they are at to be or not to be. Even cells can become cancerous. When a cell decides it's not going to do this mechanical servitude stuff anymore, the cell decides it's going to do its own thing. And it starts consuming uncontrollably and starts replicating itself, starts reproducing uncontrollably. Becomes a tumor, a blight, a plague, a pestilence. There are many, many, many different examples throughout nature and so on and so forth. Now, some of these serve their own purpose. So some of them are actually performing their duty in accordance with the requirements, let's say, of an ecosystem. But when things get really out of control and really out of balance and really out of whack, that's when, karma and consciousness and so on in the mechanical world, the mechanical kingdoms, and the animal and plant, and in those kingdoms of the elementals, that's the sort of game that they're playing. At our level, it really is on an individual basis, and how we treat the people around us, and how we treat the other beings around us, and of course, how we treat ourselves. Do we live in gratitude of the other beings that make our existence possible? Do we live in gratitude of our heart? Do we live in gratitude of our lungs? Do we even recognize that that's a thing? That have we ever even considered that's a thing? But when we practice the transformation of impressions, it becomes a thing. And how does it become a thing? Because not only are we paying attention, not only are we observing, not only are we are being mindful and being present, we are remembering. And what exactly are we remembering? We're remembering our Divine Mother. We're remembering ourself. And our Divine Mother, who furnishes us with all we need in this life. And we remember that the ether is within all of the other elements, just as they are within her. We may as well say her, because the ether is the body of the Divine Mother. That's space. All the elements are in space, and all of space is in those elements, because they're really just vibrations of that space. So in that sense, when the insults come, right? When the fire comes, and we remember our Divine Mother, and we remember that she brings us all that we need, how can we react with anger? Even if automatically the fire gets triggered inside us, and even if automatically the anger gets triggered inside us, we're in observation and remembrance of ourselves, we're in remembrance of our Divine Mother, then we can remember, okay, the Divine Mother arranged for this person to come to insult me, to trigger my anger, to trigger my resentment, to trigger that fire, so that I could see the ego that I still have to work on, to see the defects and vices that are still in me, but not to identify with them, and not to indulge them, and not to get caught up in it. To transform the impressions of that engagement of fire and fire, and extract the experiential knowledge that it's all just the ether, just vibrating at different frequencies. It's just ether vibrating as fire, but it's ether, the body of the Divine Mother, vibrating as fire, as anger, so that we can extract the knowledge, the gnosis, the consciousness from that ego of fire inside of us. Everything, every impression that we have, if we continually observe ourselves, one eye in, one eye out, and remember ourselves, our Divine Mother, we transform our experience from this mechanical reality, this illusory world which we take so seriously, and we recognize it for what it is. It is a proving ground. It is a exercise gym. It is a incubator for a monad that has not yet hatched, is not yet awake, is not yet self-realized, because it's still bottled up inside of these elements and inside of this mechanicity, and the consciousness is still trapped inside all of that. We haven't transformed those elements into their true nature which is space, that expansiveness, that emptiness, that pure potentiality, that pure source of all other elements. That is our true nature. Because after all, a monad is a space between being and consciousness and soul. There's this triangle, this trinity. And the substance between those points is a space, and it's a vehicle, it's a vessel. We want to feed that vessel. We want to fill that vehicle. It's our ark. And what we fill it with is gnosis, the experiential knowledge. But that must be extracted. And the substance that's going to build the ark and rebuild the ark for traveling in the supernal worlds, because right now our ark is trapped in the physical plane. That's why Jesus said we have to be born again. We have to be born of the fire and the waters. We have to be born of the ether, the akash. We have to take our mechanical lunar bodies and transform them into solar bodies. Well, it's one thing to say that we're going to do that in sexual alchemy, but then the rest of the day, maybe we're very, very, very lucky and we have a spouse and we can practice sexual alchemy 1 hour every day. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but if the other 23 hours of the day we're going through life mechanically and we're not transforming impressions, we're not eating mindfully, we're not eating consciously, we're not reading consciously, we're not, everything that we're not doing it consciously, we're just doing mechanically and mindlessly. Guess what? We're not transforming crap in Tantra. Because if we're not working on transforming our impressions and our reactions to impressions, and we're not comprehending our egos, if we're not breaking down and breaking free of our mechanicity, and if we're not transforming the elements in us under the command of lunar mechanical nature into our conscious solar nature, then we're not feeding our souls, because that is the substance that will feed our souls, that actually allows for spiritual development. Because, and this is key, you and I do not develop spiritually. The New Age has this all wrong. The New Age, the self-help movement is so utterly and completely detrimental, as is the New Age movement, where people go around calling themselves light workers and this and that and the other. They think it's all about them. I'm going to ascend. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going on these trips. I'm going to the astral plane. I'm healing people. I am a healer. No one's a healer unless you're a black magician. Then you can be a healer. Moses didn't part the Red Sea. Jesus didn't heal the sick. Moses had a soul. Moses had a spirit. Moses spent 40 years wandering in the desert. Well, that's not true. He did that afterwards. But Moses became a priest, a magi, by mastering his own elements within himself, so that he could feed his soul, his innermost being, his monad, to the point where his monad became a vessel and a servant and a messenger of the Logos, the being of beings, the monad of monads, we could say. It's God that parted the Red Sea. And Moses was just a conduit. Moses was just a servant. That's what real spiritual development is. Real spiritual development is about the player becoming a master of the game. It has nothing to do with the character running around in the game. So it is very useful to think about this world like an MMORPG, which stands for Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game, in case you didn't know. And you and I are just characters. And our actions, and whether or not we cooperate with the consciousness, with our innermost being, with the player, whether we cooperate or don't cooperate determines whether the player is able to get better, or if the player has to sit there in suffering, watching us throw our lives away and watching us suffer. Because, you know, in many ways, our player doesn't look at us indifferently like a character in a video game. We are, in many ways, like we are our innermost father and our divine mother's child. And they care for us deeply, as you would your child or your pet. And if any parent witnesses their child, you know, screwing up, the parent suffers tremendously. And we have to be cognizant of that. The more we fall under the spell of the ego, the more we fall under the spell of mechanicity, the more our innermost being and our divine mother is suffering because of that. The deeper we go into hell, the more they're in their own kind of hell right there with us. Because a part of them is with us in hell. That part of the consciousness, which is trapped within the egos, which contributes to our psychological hell. But because of that, we have the potential and the power within us to even go through hell and transform the experience. What does not kill you makes you stronger. This is such a cliche. And you've heard us use the expression, the Ulm of life, so often, the analogous ultimate methodology, but now you know how the elements and the elemental ordeals play into that. How facing our elements is that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. If those elements don't burn you or wisp you away on the winds or crush you under the weight or drown you under constant fluidity, and because some people live like that, right? They have no stability in their life, and they're constantly being they just go with the flow, whatever they go with. And that there's something to be said for learning to work with and mastering all of the elements, because there is a time to go with the flow. We talked about it, because each of the elements counteract and balance out the other elements. So to become a master of all the elements is really the key. That's what a magi is. We talked about this. And this is how Moses and Jesus and Buddha and the other great masters were able to perform the magic that they did out in the world, because they were masters of the elements within. So transforming impressions is a way of transforming our worlds and transforming our lives. Because again, let's go back to something that the New Agers do like to use, and that is the law of attraction. But we attract what we are. We attract what we are. And even though the New Agers talk about manifesting and manifesting desires, right? They talk about that first. That's the first thing they talk about. No, shadow work comes later. But hey, manifest what you want. Manifest that partner you want. Manifest the money you want. Manifest the automobile you want. When we reverse that and master ourselves and master our elements, and we become masters of ourselves and our elements, now the effect that we will have on the world will be tremendously profound. We will be much more likely to be able to have influence over the elements of the world, the elements in others. Not out of any maliciousness or greed or self-centered, not out of selfishness, but out of love, out of compassion. We will be masters of our own waters, and that element of water will want all our gifts and all of our powers and all of our abilities to flow out into the world for the sake of others, but in a positive way, in a constructive way, in a creative way, versus the New Age and the Black magic way of manifesting your desires by putting all of your sexual energy and all of your really, 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 and you're channeling your desire into your visualizations, and you're expending your sexual waters. Your sexual waters are flowing out into the world, but in a negative way to get what you want. Whereas if you transmute your sexual waters, work and master your inner elements first, then that power, that ability will flow out into the world and be constructive and positive, and you will not have wasted anything. On the contrary, you will be adding to. But the New Age and manifesting desires and the Black Lodge, they're wasting their sexual energy to take the elements that are around them for themselves. The white magician masters the elements within themselves. They conserve their precious sexual waters and fires. They transmute them. And with that cachet, they feed their soul, they grow, they develop. And with that cachet of creative energy and now spirit flowing through them into the world, now they have an unlimited source through the Logos to flow down out into the world and add and give to others, unlimited of themselves. This is the difference between white magic and black magic, in essence. It's very easy to begin doing black magic like this. Easy. We've said so many times, we've expressed how easy it is to fall off the high wire. How easy it is to fall off a ladder or to roll down the mountain. Right? Not so easy to get back up. It's a lot harder to get back up. It's a lot harder to stay on the high wire than it is to fall. That's why black magic is so much easier than white magic. Because white magic is about climbing the mountain, not rolling down it. It's about getting up the ladder, not falling off of it. And it's because really we have an uphill battle. It's true. I mean, there's no point in and there's no point in trying to avoid the facts. Which brings us, we should say, to honesty and objectivity. The transformation of impressions demands that we face many things that we do not want to face. Our defects, our vices, our shortcomings, the things that we still have yet to transmute and transform within us. We will be tested. We will face ordeals. And it should be noted that if you are practicing transmutation, if you have a spouse, or if you are transmuting as a single person, and you're working with the Akash, the ether, the sexual force, and you are transmuting, your tests will be harder. It doesn't get easier the further along the path you go. It gets harder. Again, this is something that the New Age has got completely wrong, because it's all about them. And they're like, once you become a light worker and this and that and the other thing, and it's all just rainbows and unicorns. And the more spiritual you become, the easier life gets and the more beautiful it's going to be, and da-da-da, and this and that and the other thing. And you're going to be manifesting this and manifesting that and attracting this and attracting that. They have no idea what they're talking about. They really don't. It's all just propaganda. Spiritually, your life will become better. Spiritually. But physically, mentally, emotionally, energetically, you're going to be facing ever more difficult ordeals of fire, of air, of water, and of earth. And you're going to be facing your deepest and darkest demons. The more you transmute, it's the law of diminishing returns. As it applies metaphysically to going deeper and deeper and deeper into one's subconscious mind, clearing out and cleansing what's down there. Well, of course it doesn't sell. And of course the New Age is what it is because it has to sell. And they sell a lot. A lot. Do you know how much Eckhart Tolle and Deepak Chopra and these guys are worth? Multi-millionaires. Like, look it up. Here's one interesting way to consider what we're talking about here. Have you ever tried to clean something or restore something that was really dirty, grungy, rusty, corroded, whatever the case may be. Maybe it was a stainless steel pot that literally had who knows how many years of burnt on grease and grime and, you know. Now, let's say you took that pot and made macaroni and cheese in it. And so now it has the cheese and the dried macaroni and cheese from the latest thing you cooked. And you can, how easy is it to, relatively speaking, to get the newest macaroni and cheese out of the pot, right? You put some dish soap, you take a sponge, and relatively easily you can get that off. But what about the really baked on, burnt on stuff that's been there for years? Right? You got to get out the steel wool. You got to get the SOS pads, the whatever it is you're using, and you put on the rubber gloves. You get on the whatever chemical you're using, or the baking soda or vinegar or whatever it is you're going to use, and you start scrubbing and scouring. The law of diminishing returns, right? And if you've ever had to do anything like this, peeling paint off an old fence, getting rust off of something, getting grime or burnt on grease, or if you've ever tried to restore something back to its original state, or clean something that's been getting grungy and grimy and for years, maybe decades, and now you're trying to get it back to its pristine original form, you know how much work it takes. And every rotation, every revolution of that scouring pad, or that steel wool, or wire brush, or whatever it is you're using, it's law of diminishing returns. At the beginning, you might get a whole bunch off. And you're like, oh yeah, I'm doing really well. But as you progress, right? At the beginning, it maybe took a minute or 2 minutes to get 50% off. 50%. Now the pan was completely black. Now you can see 50% of the bottom, the stainless steel. Took you 2 minutes. Another 2 minutes. Now you can only see an extra 10%. Another 2 minutes. Now you can only see an extra 12%. And suddenly, 15, 20 minutes in, you realize every 5 minutes is only uncovering an extra 1% of the bottom of the pan. The law of diminishing returns. So, as we develop spiritually, and we face more and more of our grunginess, of our density, of our burnt on, caked on rust, and as we try to scour our subconscious mind and scour ourselves of our egos, since we have to be prepared for this law of diminishing returns. Those egos that we face are going to be that much tougher, that much harder to get rid of. It's just the way it is. It's this way for everything. If it's this way for scouring a stainless steel pot, you can be damn sure that it's no different for scouring our psychology. In the same way that when you go to the gym, try it. Go to the gym. Pick up some weight. See how you can go from this weight, and then you put on another 5 pounds, and wow, okay, you just added another 5 pounds. You put another 5 pounds. Oh yeah, pretty easy. Or go from 10 pounds and then 20, whatever. But all of a sudden, you'll get to a point where now if you add even 1/2 a pound, you won't be able to lift it anymore. And you're going to have to spend weeks lifting that weight just to be able to add another pound to the bar. Law of diminishing returns. But that's development, that's growth. We have growth spurts at the beginning, but then it starts to level off. And the higher we get and the further we go, right? There's another thing that we should mention here, because we were talking about elements. And for this, we'll we all have, of course, star signs. And each sign is related to one of the elements. So as we are transforming impressions, as we are working with our elements, as we are facing elemental ordeals, we should be cognizant of our sign and what element our sign relates to, because that can have an impact with how we deal with various elemental ordeals. The air signs are Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. The fire signs are Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. Water are Cancer, Pisces, and Scorpio. And earth are Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. You might also want to know your birth date, so what element was rising or falling, or in relation to, and where you were born. And if you have had your astrological star charts done, then you will know if you are, for example, our astrological star chart for this lifetime, we're Gemini, air rising. So I have a lot of air, a lot of movement, right? We and a lot of mind. So, but that's only for this lifetime, right? Your astrological chart only relates to this lifetime. It relates to your personality, your physical body, your constitution, as it relates to your character, your vessel. So it's good to know the element that relates to your astrological sign as you deal with the task of mastering the elements inside and transformation of impressions. And also, for example, if you know, for example, that you're a fire sign and you have difficulty managing your anger, then again, use the knowledge that you've learned here to offset that, right? Like Eric was asking earlier, well, have more fish. Have more fish in your diet. Have less red meat in your diet. If you're a fire sign and you're constantly losing your temper and you're snapping at people and you can't get under control, or it's really messing things up, or it's because of that you're discouraged, you can't meditate on your anger because it's always over the top, or whatever the case may be, you can't transform those impressions because it's just too damn intense. Douse the flames a little bit. Turn down the gas on the barbecue, right? Less red meat, more fish. Allow that to, and then of course, practice pranayama, practice working with the Akash, practice conscious breathing. If you can bring in conscious breathing in almost any situation, no matter what that situation is, if the situation requires fluidity, flexibility, movement, well, why do you think it is that our heart rate goes up and we start breathing more heavily when we do exercise? For example, when we're sprinting. Why? because that movement requires air. It also requires energy. It requires prana that's in the blood, etc. It's all connected. But to move the earth, which doesn't want to move, the law of inertia, right? Solidity. Things want to stay stuck. Things want to keep on doing what they're already doing. That's inertia. So your body wants to stay stuck. To get it to move, sometimes you might need, well, you need motion and you need fluidity. Because both of those things, air and water, come into exercise. Because the water is also in the blood. Because that's the other thing that we need a lot of when we exercise, right? Especially when you do cardio. You need to drink a lot of water because you're sweating a lot, because the water is moving through your body, just as the air is moving in and out of your lungs, and the prana is moving around through the blood. And if you're doing something that you really enjoy or whatever, then maybe even the fire is getting going. Well, of course, your temperature is going up, your physical temperature, but also possibly emotionally. Dylan says, life force itself is prana, isn't it? Yeah. So life force is prana. When we say pranayama means breath control, or controlling the prana. So the prana itself is the ether, and it's predominantly in us. It's from a physiological standpoint. It's in the root chakra and the kundalini, but it's also very much in the blood and it circulates. But we can also circulate it consciously with the breath. So again, we're in a situation here where the mind wants to say, oh, it's here, not there, because it's like, but it's not like that, right? Because again, as we said, everything is connected to everything, and everything is in the space, which is the ether, and that ether is in everything. So we say it's predominantly here, it's predominantly there, it's doing this, it's doing that, we can control it with this, we can control it with that. Yes, that's all true. But it's not like, we can't think of it like an engineer does, or how the materialist scientists think about, well, the blood goes in the arteries and the veins, and this goes in there, and that goes in there. They don't understand that, yes, the prana is in the blood, but we also have these energetic channels called nadis that intertwine around the spinal column. And then when we practice pranayama, we're moving the prana through the nadis, right? You see this with like physical doctors and scientists, materialist scientists. Their brains explode when you try explaining this. Well, how's that it's, how can it be in the blood, but then now it's over here in these nadis? What the hell is this stuff? Number one, they can't even detect it, let alone comprehend it. What else can we share with you on this? Aha. We promised you that we would share with you some links, and we will do that now before we run out of time here. Now, there's a couple lectures that we can share on the on the transformation of impressions. You may find those challenging, but first we're going to share this. This is a did that come up all right? Okay. So this link is to one of the lectures in the course on alchemy. But here you can see that the title of the, oh, you know what? Let's just go to a screen capture here. Can you guys see that? Yeah, okay. So you can see that the title here is The Elements in Spiritual Growth. And you can listen to the audio lecture, you can download the PDF, or you can just scroll down and read the, you can read through the transcript of the lecture. Again, this is from the course on alchemy. And as you can see, the entire course is related to spiritual transformation. So this course, really, this live stream is just literally the tip of the iceberg. It's barely scratched the surface. This is a very, very useful course, not least because it includes the lecture we did today, which is the first lecture, the elements in spiritual growth. But it's going to take some of what we talked about today and expand on it in much greater detail, and we'll take it to the next level. If you feel like you want to go there at this point. Now, transformation of impressions. Oh, now that went away, so we got to bring that back here. This chapter, this from the book, The Revolution of the Dialectic. This is one of Master Samael's more challenging books, but it is also a very useful book. If you can slog your way through it, it's very, very difficult to read with the intellect. So you really do sort of have to feel your way through it, have to let your intuition guide you. Read it consciously. Try reading it with your heart. And as you can see here, it's this chapter on the transformation of impressions. We've barely touched on the topic. But this is the the moment-by-moment methodology of transforming oneself by comprehending that everything that we experience and everything around us is being orchestrated by our Divine Mother, and it's all the Divine Mother. It's all the ether. It's all her body. And it's all being organized and arranged by our individual Divine Mother. So in the transformation of that, we are transforming ourselves and our inner elements from mechanical to solar as we become, and we are feeding our own innermost being, the inner Christ, the innermost intimate essence of Christ, because the Divine Mother gives birth to the Christ. Again, there's no way we can do transformation of impressions and the elements and do them all justice, but in just even 3 hours. But we felt that by introducing the two concepts together, there is a connection between the two. And not just that, but by contextualizing it in this way, where we finally try to bring some metaphysical science to the notion soul food and feeding the soul. how do we actually do that? How do we actually feed the soul? This was the purpose of tonight's live stream, was to find a way to contextualize that and then present the metaphysical science that actually accomplishes that goal, because that really is what we're doing, is feeding our soul and growing and developing the spirit, the monad. That is really who we are. That's our true self. That's the self, the wanderer, the nomad, which has gone lifetime to lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. And also, hopefully, after experiencing this live stream, you will now know why the New Age idea of the power of positive thinking and avoiding all negativity and all that kind of stuff is a failure. Because, as we have seen, if everything is all rosy, right, there's not much to transform. There's not much impetus to transform that which is rosy. And not only that, we look at the ordeals of the elements that we have to face. They're ordeals, they're tests, they're trials. It's difficult when you're stuck or when you're under fire. You're under fire. Now, the transformation of that, it's not about finding looking at it through rose-colored glasses, or not allowing yourself to feel this or allowing yourself to feel that. You allow yourself to feel what you need to feel. This is not about repressing anything. You feel sadness, you can feel depression, you can feel anger, you can feel these things. They will arise, they will come up, the elements will react. But the point is to transform them, to not identify, to recognize that is simply the Akash being vibrated at those frequencies, that it is now expressing itself as fire. And it's doing so for me to learn something. What am I going to learn? What am I going to extract from that? And allowing your innermost being, your divine mother, to work through you, through your intuition, through your third eye, to reveal to you that which you need to see. It's the same thing for looking at art, reading poetry, reading scripture, reading Samael and Mayor's books. It's transforming the experience of that and feeding your soul. That means giving way to your innermost being, your soul, your spirit, to work through you, to show you the way, to reveal to you what you need to see, to reveal to you what you need to hear. So this is a second lecture on the transformation of impressions. We can't tell you which one you will find easier, this one or the chapter from Revolution of the Dialectic, but we've linked both in the chat, so you have links to both. Yes, and the article on the elements links to the alchemy course. And well, we're sort of at that time. If anyone has any more questions, then now would be a good time to ask them, because we're at the 3-hour mark. So if you have questions, great. If not, then we'll bid you good night and thank you for your patience. And Thank you for those who stuck out these 3 hours, because this was a heavy and challenging subject matter for me as well. Mugaboo22 says he has a question. Some organizations claim they can clean people's spiritual body. Is it possible to clean someone's spiritual body and past life impressions? You know, we have heard all sorts of things, and we have spoken to people who have had claims that they have had experiences of this entity and that master cleaning this and healing that and so on. Healing is a real phenomena, and it is possible to receive assistance. But there are, as Dylan is pointing out here, right, with the word Reiki, right? Reiki is working with prana in the physical body, and it is manipulating prana. So does acupuncture, right? You're working with energy there, and we worked with an energy healer, an energetic chiropractor we worked with to help our spinal column. But we were using breath work and focus and concentration to help align our spine, because we knew how important, how crucial the spinal column was to the work. So when we began doing the work, one of the first things we did was we sought to realign and fix our spinal column, but we didn't want to go to a backcracker, right? We didn't want to go to someone who's going to physically manipulate the spine. We went to a place where we would work with the prana, the energy, to realign the spine. We have never, all our work that we've done in self-healing has been through our innermost being and our divine mother, and working with the masters. And we hesitate, although we cannot say unequivocally that any group or any this or any that their motives or their methods are, dark or what have you, because we just don't know. There are genuine healers who work with the archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael. You can invoke the masters of medicine, Paracelsus, Hermes Trismegistus, Master Hippocrates. There are ways, and there are rites and rituals and prayers that you can do to invoke the masters of medicine to help you and aid you in the healing. You can do the rites of rejuvenation, which we've shared with you before. And they are here. You can practice the rites of rejuvenation. Every group is different. Every healer is different. We're not going to say now. You don't want to you don't want to clean yourself of past life impressions. That's not. You don't want to get rid of those, because trauma is a very misunderstood concept. And do you really want to put your faith and trust in another individual as to what you need? They may think they know what you need. They might intuit what you need. It's something that you really have to decide for yourself. And, meditate. If that's part of your path, to go to this group or this healer or that healer and allow them to perform whatever it is they're going to perform on you, then if that's part of your path to do that, don't let us stand in your way. Don't let our hesitation or our trepidation stand in the way of you and your path. If that is what is required on your journey, then go and do that. We went to an energy healer, again, to help us align our spine. We did the work, but she guided us. And like Reiki, like a Reiki master, I hesitate to use that word master, but like a Reiki practitioner, she assisted and helped guide the energy that we were working with breath, with concentration, so it was an assisted process. It just wasn't a physical one, it was a metaphysical one. And that was very beneficial for us. But in terms of somebody claiming that they can get rid of egos for you or erase traumas for you or this type of thing, there's a limit, right? There is a limit. It's not beyond the realm of possibility. And the other thing to remember as well is that black magicians will often rope people into their circle and they will win them over by performing some miracle. So some healing or some whatever. They will say, "Oh, I will do this for you," or "I will do that for you," or they will come and actually do it. And you'll be like, okay. And they've got you hooked because they perform some miracle of healing on you. It can be done. They can do it. There's a limit to what they can do, but they can do a lot. Because black magic is very powerful. So, again, you just have to follow your heart. You have to follow your intuition. Don't listen to us either way, right? We'll tell you what our heart tells us, what our intuition tells us, and it may be different than what your intuition tells you. And if that's the case, then that's just the way it is, right? Obviously, we can't both be right, but you have to do what feels right to you. You can't do what other people tell you. This is your journey. So if you feel you know what you're doing, if you feel that those other groups and those other healers are what they say they are, then by all means, you just be aware that if you get it wrong, you have to pay for those consequences, and the consequences might be very dire. So that's why we don't take this matter lightly, and we would say that if it comes to healing, go within and turn to the masters of medicine first. Follow your heart, follow your intuition, yes, of course, but leave the meddling of your metaphysical bodies, right, in the hands of the masters of medicine or in your own hands. Just be aware of, so we don't want to discourage anybody from doing anything that's supposedly that needs to be on their path, but at the same time, we don't want to have anyone fall into, we cannot afford to be naive, right? We cannot afford to be naive. Just, we just have to realize that there are many bad actors out there. That the Black Lodge is here to make us fall and make us falter and make us, and and that's their job. Their job is to twist, tempt, corrupt, etc., to dupe us, to be con men, to be wolves in sheep's clothing. That's their modus operandi. That's the way they are. And when we, in our live stream on the astral plane, we said, look, you have to be prepared for them approaching you in the astral plane as angels, as masters. And we mentioned the New Age bookstores are lined, are filled, those shelves are filled with books, with material that naive light workers channeled with automatic writing, channeled from demons masquerading as angels, masquerading as ascended masters. So if demons can masquerade as ascended masters, you can be damn sure that there are black magicians masquerading as gurus. They are everywhere. Everywhere. And the more famous they are, and the more powerful they are, and the more elite circles they walk in, the chances are they're that much more powerful black magicians. We have to be that much more cautious when we are dealing with them. Does anyone have any other questions? But you're welcome, Mugaboo. That was a good question, actually. But as you can tell, it's not easy, right? This is not easy, and that's why it's not easy to tell, right? It's not easy to discern, and that's why it's always better and safer to try to do the work yourself and rely on your own divine mother and innermost being. And there are prayers, there are methods, there are practices. Again, the rites of rejuvenation on the screen. We've given this, we've already shared the link. At the end of the day, yes, we can get some help, but realize the majority of the work we do ourselves. The majority of the work is done by our own innermost and divine mother. Our self does the majority of the work. Our job is to get out of the way of that, to participate, to cooperate, to make our faculties available to them. So when we work with the consciousness, we're allowing them to get what they need, right? So when we transform impressions They're the ones transforming the impressions through us. When we work with the elements, they're the ones working with the elements through us, right? This is always key and important to remember. We don't do the healing. No true healer does the healing themselves. They work with one of the masters or their own innermost works and invokes the other masters to assist them and to provide the healing. Anyone that says they do the healing themselves, that is possible only at a lower level of the physical body. So manipulation of the prana and for the sake of the healing of the physical body. So we're talking about acupuncture, acupressure, Reiki. So that's why you hear Reiki masters always go, oh yeah, I'm a Reiki master. I'm manipulating this, manipulating that. Yeah, okay, I get it. Right? But that's at very low level. That's at the elementals, the elements at this level. You're welcome, Eric. Anyone have any other questions? I think we've sort of beat that question, probably beat that question to death, but it's a good question and it's a tough question. It's not an easy one. It's not an easy one. None of this is easy. Let's be honest with ourselves and each other. None of this is easy. If this were easy, everybody would be doing it. If this were easy, everybody would be awake. Everybody would be transforming impressions. Everybody would be masters of their own inner nature. Everybody would be magicians. But the vast majority are black magicians because that, relatively speaking, is easy. That is easy. The left-hand path is the easy path. It is, relatively speaking. Anyone have any other comments or questions to share before we say goodnight? We're getting on in time now. So, all right. Thank you all very much for taking the time and sticking it out. It was a long one, almost 3.5 hours. So have a good weekend, and we will hopefully see you again next week. Inferential peace.